So now that we're passing data back and forth, let's populate our pages with more life. And let's start with the filters for that, so that we can set some filters here on the filters screen, which actually impact the meals we see here on the other screens. So that, for example, when I set my filter to vegetarian, I don't see the hamburger. Because if you check the dummy data, all these meals should be set up such that, for example, if we search for the hamburger there, the classic hamburger, it has the is vegan and is vegetarian flag set to false. So we should not see that if we have a filter to exclude non-vegetarian food. So let's go to the filters screen and work on it. As a first step, we can convert the filters screen to a stateful widget, because actually we'll have to manage which filters the user set or not. We'll also manage that globally in the main Dart file later, but we also need to manage it in this screen to update the values we show on the switches we're going to show on the screen. So here in my filters screen state, I'll start by initializing 4 Boolean properties: gluten-free, which initially set to false, vegetarian, which initially is set to false, vegan, which initially is set to false, and also lactose-free, which is initially set to false. We'll need that data later on. Now let's go down to our body here, and in that body, I think it makes sense to have a column, because we'll have multiple switches that should be shown above of each other. And therefore here, of course, we'll register a couple of children. As a first child, I'll add a container where I essentially want to set up some padding with edge insets all 20, and then add a child, which is just some text that tells us that we can adjust our meal selection here. So we say adjust your meal selection. We can also give this text some style, of course, and for that here, I'll here use my default title text theme here. So that's a container that simply displays a title. Below the title, I now want to have all these switches. And we can actually use a list view here. Since we're in a column, however, we can't add the list view like this. Instead, we would have to add a container, or what we can also do, we can take expanded. If you remember, that's a widget which will ensure that its child widget takes up as much space as it can get in the surrounding column or row. So it will take all the remaining space between container and, well, the end of the screen. So we can use expanded here and add our list view in there. And now, since I have a fixed amount of elements here, I'll not use the builder constructor, but the children argument here in the normal list view constructor. And now there is a specific list tile which we can use here, which looks really good. And that's the switch list tile. Again, that's built into Flutter. We haven't used that before. It works really well in a list and allows us to show a switch with some text next to it. The switch list tile requires a title, and I'll set the title here to a text widget where I say gluten-free. That's my first switch. Then we need to add a value. That is just as for the normal switch, which you already learned about, there to tell Flutter in which state this switch should be. Because it doesn't manage that state internally, we have to manage that. Now that's why I added these booleans. We'll change these when the user clicks the switches, and we'll pass the data back into the switch then to update what's shown on the screen. So here I'll set the value to gluten-free, underscore gluten-free. We can also add a subtitle if we want to, with another text widget where we say only include gluten-free meals to make it really clear what this switch does. Now, of course, we also need an onChanged listener, so a function that executes when the user taps this switch. And there we get the new value, so the new value the switch should have after being tapped. And therefore, in here we can now use setState, hence the stateful widget, where I set my gluten-free boolean equal to new value to reflect the change the user made here. If we save that, and we go to the filters page here, this is what we see. And I can now use that switch, which is pretty neat. Now, of course, we don't just have gluten-free meals. We have a couple of other switches. Now I'll repeat this list tile a couple of times, and therefore we can of course extract this into a separate widget or put it into a builder method. And I'll go for the good old builder method here, which returns a widget, build, underscore build, switch list tile sounds like a fitting name. Return the widget, and we need a couple of pieces of information in here. We need the title text, we need the description text for the subtitle basically, and we need to get a Boolean value, which is the current value, and I want to get a function which updates the value, so update value, something like that. The title is then what I use here in my title text widget. The subtitle text widget here takes the description. Here for onChanged, I'll point at update value, and the value we pass to value here should be the current value. Now when we call build, underscore build switch list tile down there, we therefore have to pass all that information. So here that was gluten-free. Here I said only include gluten-free meals. Current value is our gluten-free Boolean, and the update value function is what I cut out of my old switch list tile. So it's this function here, where we call set state and update gluten-free. So it's not much shorter, but a little bit. And now we can use that build switch list tile method and repeat it to also here build a switch tile for lactose-free to only include lactose-free meals. And of course, therefore, the current value we pass in is lactose-free, and set state should update the lactose-free value here. Then we add another list tile. Here we're talking about vegetarian food, so only include vegetarian meals. We pass the vegetarian Boolean in as a current value, and that's also what we of course update when the user clicks the list tile. And then here, last but not least, we have the vegan list tile, only include such meals, and then here therefore we pass in the appropriate Boolean property. If we save all of that and we go back, this is what we have, and now here we can set all these switches. Setting it here of course is nice. That should now also be reflected back into our meals. That means we have to wire up what we set here with what we output here in meals.